The 10 most influential women in ancient Egyptian history. Ancient Egypt, for the most part, was a deeply hierarchical society. Pharaohs sat at the top and directed the rest of society according to their whims. When they finally fell, the priests took their place and maintained the region's deeply embedded hierarchical tendencies. But there was one silver lining to all this. While their class relations were highly problematic, gender relations were not. In fact, they were really progressive in some ways. The ancient Egyptian women were considered men's equals, save for occupation. They had equal legal rights as men and could own property. During the Ptolemaic period, the Greek women were surprised by these ideas. After all, they were supervised by guardians back in Greece. In rare cases, Egyptian women even made it to administrative positions and ruled over entire cities. We have a handful of examples of women reigning over Egypt. These individuals were almost always responsible for changing the cultural landscape of the region, for better or worse. Here are the 10 most influential women of ancient Egypt. Merneith. Quite possibly the oldest known queen in human history, Merneith was a regent during the Early Dynastic Period. Daughter of King Jer, the third pharaoh of the First Dynasty, she was possibly the senior royal wife of her brother Jet, the fourth pharaoh. Speculation is that after her father's death, her brother was too young to rule, so she would have taken the throne somewhere around 2950 BCE and ruled for nearly a decade. Merneith, whose name means the beloved Neith, would have done so in direct opposition to strict religious and cultural values of her. Setebor of the 5th Dynasty and Nitocris of the 6th Dynasty are other potential examples of female political figures in earlier stages of ancient Egyptian history. In the tomb of King Den, archaeologists have found Merneith's name as a mother and regent. 2 of Merneith's tombs have also been discovered at Abydos and Saqqara. If Merneith was not merely a regent, but a pharaoh, she might very well be the oldest queen in recorded human history. Sobekneferu. Sobekneferu, the last ruler of the 12th dynasty, is the oldest confirmed female pharaoh of Egypt. Her father, Amenhotep III of the Middle Kingdom, is often associated with bringing about a golden age during his roughly 45 years of rule. After his death, his son, Amenhotep IV, ruled for about 9 years, in what was a fairly stable time. His time on the throne was short-lived, and his death left the throne empty, with no clear male heir in sight. So, Sobekneferu, who was his sister or stepsister, stepped up. Some historians have speculated whether Amenhotep IV and Sobekneferu were husband and wife as well. Her statue, which was documented and photographed before it got lost during the Second World War, showed her in a pose and with regalia appropriate for pharaohs. As far as we know, she ruled for only about 4 years. The end of her rule coincided with the rise of the fragile 13th Dynasty. It is believed that the first 2 kings of the 13th Dynasty possibly could have been her sons. Ahhotep I. We leave the Middle Kingdom and now move to the Second Intermediate Period. This is a time of fragmentation and conflict. The 17th Dynasty of Egypt arrived at the heels of the Hyksos' arrival in Egypt, which tore the land into 2. The 17th Dynasty controlled Upper Egypt or Southern Egypt from Thebes, whereas the 15th Dynasty of the Hyksos controlled Lower Egypt or Northern Egypt. Sekhenenra, the second last ruler of the 17th Dynasty, was critical of the Hyksos and started a war to reunify Egypt. After he fell in battle, his son and successor, Kamose, continued the war, only to suffer the same fate as his father. Ahhotep I, the wife of Sekhenenra and the mother of Kamose, then ruled as a regent until her other son, Ahmose I, came of age. A source narrates her being the one who has accomplished the rites and taken care of Egypt. She has looked after Egypt's troops and she has guarded them. She brought back the fugitives and collected the deserters together. She has pacified Upper Egypt and expelled her rebels. Her son and successor, Ahmose I, would go on to form the 18th dynasty under his unified control of the entire country, bringing about the New Kingdom period. Hatshepsut. One of the most important names in the entire history of ancient Egypt is, of course, Hatshepsut. The fifth ruler of the 18th dynasty, she ruled for nearly 20 years as a co-ruler with and regent for Thutmose III, her stepson. Around the 7th year of her reign, she decided to be portrayed as a male king, leading to some androgynous portraits. She re-established trade networks that had been disrupted by the Hyksos, and her reign was synonymous with prosperity. However, after her death, all signs of her were erased from monuments and inscriptions. The general theory is that Thutmose III wanted to remove all evidence regarding her due to religious and cultural reasons. Hatshepsut commissioned some of the most magnificent construction projects in Egyptian history, including major additions to the Karnak temple complex, which had been erected during the Middle Kingdom. The red chapel she constructed might have originally been located in the Temple of Amun at Karnak. The Speos Artemidos near Memphis is another example of her great projects. The two temples here are cut into rock and cliffs. The mortuary temple at Thebes is yet another example of her love for glamorous monuments and marvelous architecture. Tiye. The golden age of the 18th dynasty cannot be discussed without mentioning the reign of Amenhotep III. With Queen Tiye as her great royal wife, he ruled the land for nearly 40 years, ushering it into an era of unprecedented splendor. He is widely considered one of the greatest pharaohs to ever live. But, and this is a big, massive, ridiculous but, his death brought about one of the most notorious periods in ancient Egyptian history. His son, Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten, upended Egyptian culture and introduced a monotheist religion. This period is known as the Amarna Period, and one of the major figures of this period was Tiye, Akhenaten's mother. Suggests that she was a major figure at the court of her son and was instrumental in the religious reforms he introduced. Even though she held polytheistic beliefs like nearly all Egyptians, she thought these radical policies were the only way to counter the ever-increasing power of the priests of Amun. After the death of Akhenaten, all evidence of his existence was erased by his son and Tiye's grandson, King Tut. Her mummy has been discovered at the Valley of the Kings, where she was probably transferred at a later time in history. Nefertiti. Nothing like a little bit of gender ambiguity to start the day. The king Akhenaten changed Egyptian art in a major way. What had remained static for centuries was suddenly far more dynamic. It's hard to see whether it was simply dynamism or whether he really looked like that. He might have been ancient Egypt's first queer king. Some historians believe he might have had some sort of a disease. But one thing is for sure, his wife, Nefertiti, offers more questions than it answers. A co-regent and queen with Pharaoh Akhenaten, Nefertiti is portrayed with an unprecedented frequency alongside her husband. The couple had 6 daughters, but Akhenaten also took other wives, including his own sister. Nefertiti disappears from the historical record after the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, and we know that 3 of the couple's daughters had not survived that long. However, there is a very real possibility that Akhenaten's successor, Smenkhare, was actually Nefertiti. Since she served as a co-ruler for part of Akhenaten's reign, it makes sense. If she was pharaoh, she would have gone into damage control and abandoned her husband's city, Amarna. She would have also raised Tutankhamun or King Tut, Akhenaten's son from a different wife, as polytheistic. King Tut would later try to destroy all signs of Akhenaten from history, and his successors would do the same. Discovered in the 20th century, Nefertiti's bust is an iconic image that has been referenced multiple times by modern artists. Nefertari. Nefertari was the first of Ramesses II's great royal wives. Although she is not thought to have been a ruler at any point, she did wield incredible influence in the courts. We know that she played an active role in foreign policy and diplomatic correspondence, since she could read hieroglyphics, a revered skill for the time. Her responsibilities included religious and cultural functions, which would improve the pharaoh's image of his subjects. Since Ramesses II's reign as the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty is considered one of the finest eras of Egyptian history, the importance of foreign relations cannot be understated. Her significance in this capacity is signaled by the temple at Abu Simbel. Dedicated to Nefertari and Hathor, the goddess symbolizing the motherhood of the pharaohs, this is a beautiful monument where both Ramesses and Nefertari are depicted in equivalent sizes. Her tomb is located in the Valley of Queens near Thebes. One of the most well-preserved tombs, it is full of decoration and elaborate artwork. Twosret. During the reign of Seti II of the 19th dynasty, the civil wars and internal conflicts offered a nice indication that the New Kingdom era was approaching its end. Upper Egypt had been lost. Lower Egypt was barely hanging by a thread. After his death, the throne was assumed by Siptah, who was not a crown prince. After 6 years of regal rule, he was succeeded by Seti II's wife and the last ruler of the 19th dynasty, Twosret. Twosret ruled anywhere between 2 to 3 years, but she tried to pass off Siptah's rule as her own in the records. She began erecting the Temple of Millions of Years at Thebes, which was probably functional during her time. Her rule was marked with further conflict, and it is quite possible that a civil war erupted from within her court due to unresolved issues regarding her succession. Setnakhte, who was probably a minor descendant of Ramesses II, overthrew her and took over the throne. Setnakhte usurped her tomb in the Valley of the Kings in an attempt to erase her from history. Arsinoe III. And now we move centuries into the future. After Alexander of Macedonia conquered Egypt along with half the world and died young, Egypt fell to Ptolemy, one of his generals. Thus began the Ptolemaic era of ancient Egypt. It was the daughter of Ptolemy III and the spouse of Ptolemy IV, Arsinoe III, who served as queen from 223 to 203 BCE. A feared warrior, she is known for having led forces in large battles during the Fourth Syrian War. When Ptolemy IV took 55,000 troops to battle the Seleucids, Arsinoe commanded a section of the infantry phalanx. After suffering some losses, she inspired the exhausted and demoralized soldiers to fight for their wives and children. After the death of her husband, Ptolemy IV, the next-in-line ministers knew that regency would fall to her, so they conspired against her. Before she could be informed of her husband's death, she was assassinated. Cleopatra. Oh, Cleopatra, the empress who has caught Hollywood's eye. After the death of Ptolemy XII, civil war took over the Ptolemaic kingdom. His children could not come to terms. Cleopatra Selene VII had to flee, whereas her brother claimed the throne for himself. Cleopatra was a shrewd politician. After seducing and coveting the favor of Julius Caesar, she was able to make her way back to the throne. Caesar and Cleopatra also had a child together, but Caesar did not mention him anywhere in his will. Cleopatra was extremely well educated and was the rare Greek ruler who spoke the language of the locals. A major patron of the arts, she promoted Egyptian cultural and mythological legacy. But everything did not pan out in her favor. After Caesar's death, Roman general Mark Antony became equally, if not more, enamored with her. The two had a legendary love affair and 3 children to prove it. On the other hand, Rome had fallen into a civil war. Antony and Cleopatra were both on the back foot when the disheartened Antony heard false news of Cleopatra's death and committed suicide. Upon hearing that Antony had killed himself, Cleopatra retreated to her chamber and committed suicide as well. Thus ended the Ptolemaic kingdom, and Egypt fell to the Romans. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button. For more content like this, subscribe to the channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next one.